All right. Well, thank you both so much for being here today. Today we are celebrating the launch of Everyman with the author Shelly Connor and her conversation partner for this afternoon, Deesha Philyaw. Shelly Connor, a Chicago native, spent her summers bouncing between her grandmother in Memphis and relatives in Los Angeles, reveling in the sprawl of the Great Migration. She received her PhD from the University of Illinois at Chicago. A multi-genre writer, she is the creator of the Queer Life web series and has published essays on dapper queer aesthetics, Black womanhood, self-sustainable living, and their intersections in various publications, including the AV Club, The Griot, Playboy, and Crisis Magazine. An excerpt of Everyman appears in Obsidian, Literature and Arts in the African Diaspora. Connor is assistant professor of creative writing at the University of Central Arkansas and lives in Arkansas with her wife and their dog, Whiskey. Deesha Philyaw's debut short story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, won the 2021 Penn Faulkner Award for Fiction, the 2020-2021 Story Prize, and the 2020 LA Times Book Prize, the Art Seidenbaum Award for First Fiction, and was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies focuses on Black women, sex, and the Black church, and is being adapted for television by HBO Max with Tessa Thompson executive producing. Deesha is also a Kimbilio Fiction Fellow and will be the 2022-2023 John and Renee Grisham Writer in Residence at the University of Mississippi. Now, before I turn the time over to the two of them, I just briefly wanted to touch on a couple of the upcoming events at our bookstore. Wednesday, July 28th at 6 p.m. is our virtual Lit Knit, where we get together for casual conversation, crafts, and snacks. It's open to crafters of any kind, and if you'd like to attend, you can email Catherine with a C at wellerbookworks.com for the Zoom link. Saturday, July 31st at 2 p.m., we're hosting Lynn Stein on this YouTube channel. She's a textile artist and the author of Shedding the Shackles, Women's Empowerment Through Craft. And this will be a show and tell style craft event featuring the crafts discussed in the book. We're going to be ending today's event with a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. So if you have questions for Shelly or Deesha, drop them in the YouTube chat box and I'll make sure they get asked. And lastly, if you enjoyed this conversation, please consider supporting the authors by buying their books. And please consider supporting our bookstore by buying them through us. And I'll leave links where you can do so off to the side. And now without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to the two of you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Salem. Shelly, congratulations.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
I am feeling excited and, a bit starstruck because I am a fan of your work. So
thank you
so much for agreeing to do this.
Oh my gosh, it is an honor to be celebrating your debut with you. Thank you for inviting me. Can we start with a toast to you and to Everyman?
Yes. So
salute and tell everybody what you're drinking.
I am drinking a Manhattan because if you have the book, if you've read it, you know the title character is Eve, every Eve man. Last name spelled M-A-N-N. So this is a Manhattan.
So a nice grown-up drink.
Yes, it will put hair on your chest.
Well, cheers to you.
Thank you.
To Eve. We're going to be talking about Eve a little bit later in our conversation. This novel is just fantastic. I'm very proud of you. I hope you're proud of what you've accomplished. It is a feat. You have blended, everything that we love about literary fiction with a lot of history. Like I was nerding out in the pages. And at the same time, it's a really intimate book, and we get into the interior lives of these characters and their secrets, so many secrets through and secrets on top of secrets, and so I was immediately drawn into the character's world. And as you mentioned, Eve is your primary character, but the story is from the perspective of a number of different people in Eve's world. And so it feels, between the multiple perspectives and then the fact that the book spans decades and generations, it's just really epic. And so I just love getting lost in that. So thank you for creating this gem. So I want to talk about the story. I want to talk about Eve. I want to talk about all of this from a craft perspective as well. I want to get into everything. So just a little background without spoilers for folks who may not have read the book. Eve Mann, Everyman, is the main character. She is a young woman. She's 21, 22 in 1972. And she doesn't know a lot about her family. She knows that her mother died. She's been told her mother's died in childbirth, and she wants to know more. I think that's probably the best way to sum it up without giving away, there's so much more to the story, but I won't give it away. So I want to understand the impetus for Everyman. Did it start with Eve? Did it start with this idea of migration and the stories and who was left behind? Or did it start with a different character? Where did you start?
Yeah, so it started with Eve. My mom has been tracing our family genealogy for decades, right? And so this is before you get ancestry, DNA, and all of that. So it was really kind of old school, having to wait literally like a decade before they released the census. I think they do it like every 10 years or something like that. And I just was fascinated by her search and what she has been able to uncover. And so at the time I was teaching in Chicago public schools, and I thought it'd be a really cool project to do with my students. I taught 6th and 7th grade. And so I made these cute little booklets that they could take home and just ask their family these questions like, what's your mother's full name, fathers, grandparents, and to see how far you could go. And to just we would create this family chart, right, from the software. And so I was super excited. I knew, like, with African-American families, you're going to hit that roadblock of slavery, right? I didn't expect them to even get that far. My mom has traced us back to the early 1800s, so with relatives who were enslaved. But what I didn't expect were the very early roadblocks that my students found. Like they would go home and come back with these empty books, like, not knowing mother's name or father's name, being raised by grandparents or aunts, or someone who also just did not want to divulge that information to them. And I thought it was just really heartbreaking and sad. And so I wondered about those stories. I wondered about, sure, we've got, a lack of records and things with slavery, but then you've got this kind of willful amnesia, and willingness to forget that Toni Morrison describes, where we don't want to remember. We are erasing names out of the family Bible, and it's like, what horrific things maybe have these people done, or what did they do to make them kind of get kicked out of a family, right? And so I thought about those types of stories and wanted to even go deeper, that sometimes it's not you've done something bad, sometimes you just want to create this sort of distance between. So I thought about a character who was just kind of stripped of her identity in this way, her familial identity in this way.
Yeah. And when you mention identity, it's and secrets, it's there were so many revelations in this novel. And I'm thinking about, and I keep saying I don't want to do spoilers, but like, the scene where Eve is in her class with Professor Leroy for the first time, and she sees the blonde woman, and Eve thinks she knows who that, just sort of a type of person, and has no idea of this woman's identity. And then there's a whole story there. So it was really an adventure in some ways in this book, that each character opened a different door to a different story. And that's so emblematic of our genealogy, of our histories. Each relative, each person, each branch on the family tree, they have a story, and it just leads to another story. So speaking of that, did you know, how soon after, because you started with Eve, did you know that you wanted this to be multiple perspectives? Because she's at the center, but we are, different characters, we get their perspectives very intimately.
Yeah, that started right away
Mm-hmm.
when I created the character of Nell, and as more and more characters got created, came to
Mm-hmm.
be,
Yeah.
um, their stories were very compelling. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, in earlier drafts, their stories were way more compelling than Eve's, and so one of the revision things that I had to work on was uh, beefing up Eve's story a bit
Mm-hmm.
more, because in the second half of the book you get a lot of the older stories, and
Mm-hmm.
I spent a lot of time there, and I really needed to make the more contemporary ones with Eve and Nell just as compelling. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah. And can you talk about the sort of the scope of time? I know and we're going to talk about you research. This is evident. There's some, wonderful details that clearly came from research. From the time you had the idea or started researching to sending in the draft to the publisher, how long did it take you?
It's been like 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it does not take 16 years to write a book. It took 16 years to work on this one. And a lot of that
Yeah.
was also, rejection
Yeah.
and revision,
Mm-hmm.
and then working on other projects and stuff. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was 16 years from start to finish. And the research is what also kind of kept me sane, because I
Mm-hmm.
would say I can go deeper with this. Let me research. And then it got to be that type of book that
Yeah.
included all that research, because I was like, this is so cool.
Yeah.
I want the reader to know this. And then I was just like, yo, put it in,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that, with the omniscient narrator,
Yeah.
they can have that
You can
information.
do that. And, I was telling somebody about your book this morning as I was preparing, and I was saying, I can't remember the last time I read an omniscient narrator, not short story, not novel. So it caught me by surprise at first, but it does give you all those gems, so that, there's I think there's more intimacy in different scenes between characters because of that. But then we also can move forward and backwards in history because of that omniscient narrator, so that when you're talking about Bloody Sunday, we also get the historical context about Obama, like those are, and so if it, for what it's worth, as one reader, I savored that. I savored that you included those tidbits, that you really just gave us this sort of full history, with lots of those kinds of details. And I'm trying to find my research question, but now I've had like 2 sips of wine, so sorry,
There
we'll
you
come back
go.
to, oh, I know what it was. You also mentioned that in your acknowledgments, that libraries and librarians play a big role in your life. And that really resonated with me as a kid who used to spend whole summer days sitting on the floor of the library reading. Can you talk more about that, and also then tie that into the research? And, I'm sure you did research that also happened outside of libraries, but just that whole research part of it, the experience of it.
Yeah, I mean, libraries, that's my second home.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly part of that Generation X, where
Yeah.
you got out of school, you went to the library and you did your
Right.
homework.
Yes.
I just had the privilege of being able to go behind the desk and go in my mom's office. And so I would go and, like, look what I'm doing. Look where I am.
Check me out.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I spent, I mean, I learned how to ride my bicycle in the library during
Wow.
closing hours. So it's my heart is there.
Mm-hmm.
And just, yeah, so the amount of research, and now, a lot of that stuff is just online and
Yeah.
Google, but I also did physical research. I went to Ideal, Georgia, uh,
Okay.
and just kind of soaked up the environment and everything like that. And that was pretty cool because I felt like Zora Neale Hurston when I got there.
Yes.
I literally just, I mean, it's smaller than an ant's ass, that town, right? So I just pulled into a gas station, and the gas pumps were, I kid you not, probably the same ones that were there in the 70s. It was the old school gas pump.
Yeah, they weren't digital. They had
Nope.
the flipping numbers.
Yeah, it still had that. And so I just stood there and I had my camera and I was taking just pictures of the scenery. Then cars just started kind of pulling in. They like, hey, what you doing? And I'm like, just taking some pictures. I'm writing a book. They were like, about Ideal? And I said, yeah, it's Black folks. And they told me everything.
Everything.
They told
Nice.
me about where the Black side of town was, where the old Black school was. And they just told me everything. And I thought it was the coolest experience ever. A lot of it, internet research and stuff like that. And I got so into the research, that'll get in the way of writing the book too.
Yes, that's we procrastinate because we can still call that work.
Yes. But yeah, so it was a lot of fun. And I've always been into reading and literature, and only later got into history and historical research. So to be able to blend these and make it blend, I hope seamlessly in the novel. I just wish when I was in school that we had these narratives and stories like in history and social science, which, I mean, I could have been a historian too. I guess now I kind of am.
Well, I was going to say, I double checked your bio in the back because I was like, wait, is she a history professor? Like, I felt like you could have been, but it was very seamless for me. So let's see. In the novel, you have characters who are queer, characters who are figuring out what queer identity means to them, characters who are compelled to hide their love for a person of the same gender, and also characters who are just outright homophobic. So that's a lot, and from a craft perspective, what was important for you, and what was your process like drafting and revising these characters, their experiences and their voices? Like, what was important to you to get right?
Yeah, it was a process of just layering over time. And the more comfortable I got with my own identity as a queer person, the more, I mean, the queerer the book got, quite honestly. Every time I would go over. So you got more Nell, you got additional queer characters over time. Every time that I went through to revise a section or an area, something queer got layered in. And that's kind of what it was, just layering. And the more I got comfortable with something, the more I was able to delve into it in the book. And that's, with the queer stories and characters and everything else. I remember getting caught up on being able to write like a sex scene. I was stuck on that for probably a year because you start thinking like, oh, who's going to be reading this, right?
Yeah.
And what's my mama gonna say, right?
Oh gosh, yes.
And so, but in the older I got, then it's just like, you can't be 40 plus years old, worrying about stuff like this. But yeah, the more I got comfortable with myself, the book benefited from that.
And kudos on the Pam Grier dollhouse movie. I was like, I just love those details and how you use that to explore how these best friends were trying to navigate their friendship after one of them came out to the other, because it could have just been this really awkward, stilted conversation, and you never took the easy path, which is I just thought, wow, Nell she really cares about Eve, because I don't know, I would have bounced maybe if I was Nell, but I just, you talked about layers of complexity earlier, and that's one of the ways that you did that you looked at the complexity of, you know, Black women's friendships, and, you know, and how we really don't want to throw each other away. You know, we really try not to.
Let me tell you a fun research fact about that.
Okay.
So I wanted there to be a film kind of at the center of that, you know, the lens to open that debate between the two of them. And I thought it was going to be porn. So I did an extensive amount of
just research, you know,
porn research, and but also in researching film. And it's not like you're popping in a tape into the VCR or anything. If you're watching a movie, you know, in the early 70s or late 60s, it's going to be in a theater.
Right.
And so I realized, all right, these two friends are not going to go watch a flick in the movie theater. So it has to be some other type of film that kind of has these elements attached to it. And I was like, all right, blaxploitation, Pam Grier, here we go. So I went down that rabbit hole of watching all of these blaxploitation films with Pam Grier, and I'm a Pam Grier fan now, for sure.
She's on Twitter, and she used to follow me. I hope she still does, but hopefully she reads the book too.
Hey, Miss Grier.
So let's see. You and we talked about this a bit. You know, this is a great migration novel. You have family members from the South who, during the Great Migration, they moved to Chicago, where you're from originally, you're native. And you also spent summers in the South with relatives. And we talked about how Everyman is set in ideal Georgia. But you also take us to Alabama. We also are in Chicago. So place is a huge part of the novel. Is there a place that Eve, do you think, by the end, that she would call home, or, you know, will call home? And then what makes place home for you? What makes a place home?
That's a great question. So I think Eve definitely, you know, calls Chicago home, the South Side of Chicago home. But what's really special about the South Side of Chicago and other destination points from the Great Migration is you have these enclaves of Southerners that have brought with them the food, the speech patterns, the expressions, and things like that that are very, very Southern. And so it still has that feel, and especially when you're, you know, still returning to the South, right? So my mom continued and continues to go back to Memphis and call Memphis home. In fact, she tells me up until the time I was 7, I too referred to Memphis as home. Like, we're going home for Christmas, right?
Yes, yes.
And so I think that would be similar for Eve. And so place was very, very important to me because I did feel such a strong connection. I have all my life to the South. And now being, you know, living in Arkansas, where we have our homestead, my dad's from Arkansas, you know, mom's from Memphis. And so the South has always also felt like home to me, as well as Chicago. And I just really wanted to kind of reflect that in the book, that you've got these, especially if we're into hyphenated identity descriptions, like I would call myself a Southern Northerner.
Okay.
I've got these deep Southern roots, and now, especially now that I am living in the South, you know, went to school in the South. I went to Tuskegee as well, and I really wanted to put that in there too. Again, all this layering, that's something that I went back and sort of layered in, being really inspired by like Ellison's Invisible Man.
Yes.
Which is, you know, I make some real direct references.
Yes.
With Invisible Man. I just have a fun time being in conversation with Ellison's Invisible Man as well. So.
And speaking of fun, that was a question I had about that. Was there a scene or a chapter or a character that was particularly fun to write? And because I don't think we talk enough as writers about how writing can and should be fun and pleasurable. Like we talk about it so seriously and like we're, doing surgery and we're really not. And there's, something to be said for play and experimentation. Where did you have the most fun with this book?
A couple of places. I had fun with Professor Woodbridge.
Yes.
And in fact, I took him from Ralph Ellison. Ellison threw him away. He was in an earlier draft of Invisible Man and didn't make the final cut. I found that out reading Roderick Ferguson's Aberrations in Black. And he literally only had one line of dialogue in Aberrations in Black, but it was enough for me to get a sense of who he was as a character. And so I had fun writing him. I also had fun, and it's probably weird to say, but the uses of salt chapter.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
When somebody dies.
I was tasting salt in my mouth. I was reading that.
That was fun because in the writing process, by the time I got to that chapter, that's what I call just kind of when you get to a point of writing where you're like, wait a minute, this is what I want all the other chapters to do. This is the example.
Yes.
And so that was that chapter of, with the historical references and stuff.
Marie Laveau.
And so that's when I decided to go back and do the same kind of formatting for the earlier chapters and to do it for the laters, where you get this historic framing or referencing that starts them off, and then you zoom into the characters. And so I remember workshopping that in my workshop at UIC, and they were like, I like the salt part. It needs more salt though. Like go in. They were like, just go in. And I always joke that it reminds me of the SNL skit, needs more cowbell.
Yeah, more cowbell.
More cowbell. And so I was like, and they were just like, yeah, I just kind of wish it had more salt. And I was like, okay,
you can do that.
Yeah.
No, I really appreciated that chapter with the salt. It was one of those things that was so tangible and sensorial. It was, very pleasurable to read. And Woodbridge is one of my favorite characters. Where he first appears, I was like, who's that with the watch? So you kind of gave us that breadcrumb. I was like, all right, what do they say if there's a gun in the scene that's got to go off? So I was like, there's something with this person with the watch. So I'm going to be, reading for that. And then, the scene where he shows up, when Leroy is at the Washington statue, it's, a really beautiful scene. And then, to see how he continues to show up for young people, I was like, we all need a Woodbridge. We all need a Woodbridge. So, and I love just knowing where you sort of revived him from Ellison. That's a great story. Let's see. Was there a scene or chapter or character that was particularly challenging for you to write, either from a personal perspective or a craft perspective, or both?
Yeah, so Jean is a minor character, and it was challenging to write because as I started making the book more queer, because one of the things with, the Black literary canon, I'm like, where are the queer folks? Where are we?
Come on.
And so then I was like, where are all the queer folk, right? And so the gender queer folk. And so it was challenging because I did not want the book to disclose Jean's biological gender or sex, biological sex. And so that was another benefit of being able to write it from the omniscient narrator, because it could use gender neutral pronouns and without being stuck in the time.
Where they would not have.
Right. And so it was challenging because I didn't want to disclose that. I also didn't want the reader to care. Like Nell doesn't care
Mm-hmm.
It's not important to their relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
yeah, it was challenging because I wanted to honor them, you know.
Mm-hmm. Um, so names are important in Everyman. Can you talk a bit about the significance of names? And we know it's names are huge in our culture. So can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so I've always been just in awe with what Toni Morrison does with names and naming, and
Mm-hmm.
with Song of Solomon, what she
Mm-hmm.
did. This is another what I consider a response to works like that, and how, it was the journey of Milkman to kind of discover his name
His
and
name.
identity. And that's exactly what Eve is doing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to get really good at names and naming things. And
Yeah.
um, when I was a beginner writing, that's what I struggled with the most. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was really bad at character names and chapter names and things like that. Just not very imaginative. And
Mm-hmm.
so I kind of worked to do that. Like, if every name is a story, what's that
Yes.
story and what should that name be? I mean, I,
Mm-hmm.
I have my own name story. You ask me, am I M.
Yes.
Shelly? Am I Shelly? And people are always, what's the M for? And I'm like, for my first name, but
Right.
yeah, I legally changed my name to M. Shelly Connor. I've always been called Shelly
Mm-hmm.
as a nickname, but that was a nickname. And so when I asked my mom, and if you were to ask her, why do you call her Shelly when her name, well, it was Marcia?
Mm-hmm.
And she would say, I always wanted a little girl called Shelly. And they said, well, why didn't you name her Shelly? And she says, I didn't want one named Shelly. I wanted one called Shelly.
Ah,
So also the importance of language I learned at an early
yes.
age, right?
Yes.
Kind of be deliberate in these things.
Mm-hmm.
And what people are called nicknames, their real names.
Yeah.
There's a story behind that. And, this one was a humorous story, but I thought about what are the different name stories of these characters of
Mm-hmm.
Eve, and her name story is very similar to Macon Dead in
Yes.
Song of Solomon. That
Mm-hmm.
a mistake, somebody makes an error, and that's what goes on the
And you're
paperwork.
stuck with it. Yeah.
Right.
And even Leroy and Leroy, like
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
was
And
which
you know how Black folks do. They just
yes.
gonna mess with your name. They're gonna
Right.
manipulate it. They're gonna turn it into
That's
all these
right.
things. So yeah.
He was teased, but he embraced it. He embraced that Leroy when he became a professor, which, it also harkened Amir Baraka, being Leroy Jones previously. Um, so I was in conversation with Donnie Walton and Dantiel Moniz recently, and we were talking about, and you're going to get this a lot, people asking you about the audience for your book. Who's the audience? Who were you thinking about, or were you thinking about an audience when you were writing Everyman?
Black folk. Like what Toni Morrison says, I'm writing for Black people. I am absolutely writing for Black people. I'm writing for Black queer people.
Yes,
And but it's a good book and a book that's universal and
that's
has
right.
universal themes. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, that's part of the reason why it's titled Everyman, because
Mm-hmm.
a Black woman can be an everyman character, can
Come
be
on, come on, come
representative
on.
of these feelings and these struggles and these issues and this
That's
type of
right.
narrative. And so, yeah, it's very direct that you can
Yeah.
have a Black woman as the everyman character in the book.
And you literally have a Black mother speaking that over her Black girl child.
Yeah.
I really love that. Um, do you feel like you're a different writer or a different person for having written this book? Did this book change you?
Yeah. I write about, as I got more comfortable and came into my own, how it changed the book, but
Mm-hmm.
also the book certainly changed me. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm in awe of it, and
Mm-hmm.
what I was able to accomplish. So absolutely, you know, I went all in on this one.
Yeah.
I dedicated my entire life and to it, to this point.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did everything in my power to ensure its success and that it got out there in the world. And it's a long journey, and it was very, very difficult to do, because as you know, it's hard to get published and
Yes.
and to get noticed. So it's changed me. It's now made me a published novelist.
Yes. Yes.
So and whatever, comes with that, as you know, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
gosh, if I could, get the accolades that you get, that would be amazing. But
Thank
I
you.
am super proud for it to even be in the world and on shelves.
Yeah. And sometimes people don't believe that, right? Because, people ask me like, did I expect my book to, and I was like, no, I had no expectations. I just wanted to have a published book in the world that I wrote for Black women like like that was the goal. And then you feel like, hey, I did it,
Yeah.
and that's a good feeling. And, that is, and I'm happy that you're experiencing that you do feel good about that, because sometimes it can be, but what about? And it's like, can we just have a moment? Can we just have this moment of accomplishment and achievement, and
I
we
am
have that.
definitely an advocate of celebrating every step and every
Yes.
moment, because I'm like,
Yes.
it wasn't guaranteed or promised even that it
Yes.
would, get on the shelf or anything like that. And
Mhm.
so I celebrated,
Yes.
completing it. I celebrated, when it was excerpted
Mhm.
in a journal. So all of these things, and just toasting to it and
Yes.
me. So yeah.
Yes. Let's see. Okay, we do want to leave time for questions, but I do have some more myself.
Yeah.
Um, what do you hope readers will take away from Everyman?
I mean, I'm happy for them to take away anything positive, anything dealing with craft, that you can tell a story in this way with an
Yes.
omniscient narrator. Anything historical, there are queer people in the past, in Black communities, in the church, in the now.
Mhm.
And we all have important stories. We are our own experiences are text, to learn
Mhm.
and grow from. And yeah, just if any bit of inspiration anyone can take from this book, I'm I'm happy to be a part of it.
Mhm. And speaking of inspiration, now that you're on the other side of debuting a novel, what advice do you have for writers who are still working toward this moment?
Um, Stick with it and avail yourself of all of the free and low cost resources that you can find.
Mhm.
Um, I took the hard, long way. I entered a PhD program in order to finish this book. I felt that I was a good writer, but I wasn't great enough to tell the story that was in
Mm.
it, right? And
Mhm.
so I had to first invest in myself. I invested heavily in PhD
Mhm.
degree. You don't have to do all that. There are so many writing workshops and
Yes.
things, and gather your writing community,
Mhm.
people who you can trust, um,
Yes.
to read your work and comment on your work and love your work even in its infancy.
Mhm. Um, and I know you're super busy right now and you're about to get even busier with this book launch, but are you making time or finding time to read? And if so, what are you reading right now?
Yeah, strangely, I'm reading a lot slower, but also I'm reading multiple books at a
Mhm.
time, which I don't normally or didn't normally do, which changed the way that I read too. Uh,
Mhm.
so I'm reading Kiese Lehman's re-release of Long Division that I
Yes.
call Long Redivision. And I'm also reading Regina Bradley's Chronicling
Yes,
Stankonia,
yes,
and
yes.
I'm reading Robert Jones Jr., The Prophet.
Yes.
I'm really taking my time with, because what he does with language,
Come on, come on.
so I mean, it just reminds me of Baldwin and Morrison, and I soak up a lot from that with
Yes.
craft, and so sometimes it's just reading a paragraph and kind of sticking with it or rereading it.
Yes.
Like in your first story in The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, I sat there and like read it 3 times before continuing, because it just
Thank you.
and I'm like, man, I've never done that before. So yeah, those are the 3 that I am actively reading simultaneously.
Yes. And then, oh, we got time for one more question. What's next? What are you going to work on next? I know, you just got this one out in the world, but sometimes people have multiple projects going. So
yeah, so I am working on, kind of in the concept and research stage of novel number 2.
okay.
And I'm always kind of revisiting my web series. Only the first episode was published as a webisode, and so I'm revising that as well. And then I'm always like popping in doing essays that are published on things. So I just wrote one on the whole Nicole Hannah Jones tenure thing for NBC, and that was published. And then for Sisters of AARP, I just wrote about learning to swim after 40.
That was great. That was great.
So those pop up, and I like to take the opportunity to kind of do those shorter projects that you can see kind of instant gratuity.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, before we turn it over to Salem, I just want to toast to you one last time. Cheers. Congratulations. And I wish you and the book much, much success.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both so much. This has been like such a beautiful conversation so far. Got lots of positive comments from the viewers, lots of congratulations and woos and yays. There's still time to leave questions for any viewers. We do have one. Did your former students or personal relationships inspire specific characters in Everyman?
Oh yeah, good question. As a writer, you get that a lot. Like, is this based on someone? Not really. Sometimes I take kind of different qualities or characteristics from people I know and might add them to a character, but no one particular student's story. It was just the small percentage of the students that ran into those roadblocks that I based that character on. Nice drink break. I feel like anytime there's a maternal character, there's probably always a little bit of my mother in there.
Yeah.
That happens. I turned in my manuscript and I was like, oh, wow, 6 out of the 9 stories have mother-daughter stuff in there. I didn't realize that. Clearly, I had some stuff to work out. It sneaks in there.
Yeah, but I mean, my mom's amazing. So obviously she's going to be reflected somewhere in these.
I really enjoyed like throughout this conversation hearing you talk about the books that inspired you and like the things that you drew from like Invisible Man. What would you say are the books that you use the most while writing Everyman?
Definitely Song of Solomon and Invisible Man are the 2 major ones. But if you're looking for like Easter eggs, there's even a little Stephen King in there. I'd be curious to know if anyone finds that one in particular. But Edward P. Jones's The Known World is actually the book that made me put down my first draft of Everyman and enter the PhD program to study, because I read The Known World and I was like, whatever this little thing is I'm writing, it can be much better. So I definitely have to credit that. And Zora Neale Hurston, just her storytelling. So Their Eyes Were Watching God, but just anything that she's written, I just love.
Awesome. Thank you. And I wanted to ask both of you, are there any kind of like closing thoughts that you'd like to leave our viewers with? What do you hope that people take away from this conversation?
Deesha.
You know, I mean, I know I'm part of the conversation, but it was just very affirming for me too, of writing as work, as rewarding work, but work, because a lot of times, you know, we get questions from people about our work, and I don't think they understand, you know, how much work. And so I just appreciate the whole conversation, Shelly, but especially you talking about it. This was years in the making. You went into a PhD program. It was the research, it was revising, and it wasn't just, I want to get published and I want, you know, this kind of gold star, but how can I grow? How can I get better? Oh, look at what this writer did. I want to try that. You know, the experimentation and the wanting to tell a good story and the best story you can, and the effort. So knowing that just was reflected over and over in our conversation, that's so important. And, you know, I'm just thinking about all of the folks who are working towards the moment that you're in now. They're being, you know, they're going to benefit if they can take that to heart and be willing to invest in themselves and their stories the way that you have, because clearly it pays off.
Yeah, I want people to invest in Black writers.
Mm-hmm.
Buy Black books,
Yeah.
tweet about us, you know, mention us on all social media platforms and things like that. There's so many ways that you can support us, because we've got to open this door wider for Black
Yes.
writers. It is
Yes.
a very narrow pathway to squeeze through
Mm-hmm.
into publishing, and being published by mainstream press and stuff like that. So we need Black stories, Black writers, and that way we can open the door for more of us.
That's right.
And I did just have a couple other questions pop up for you, Shelly, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So this is kind of piggybacking off of the books that have been talked about throughout this conversation. But what were some of the first books that reached you in terms of awakening literary aspirations?
Yeah. Depending on how far back you go, because like I said, I did grow up in a library, and I remember sitting in the children's book section, and you know, you pick your favorites and stuff like that. But at some point, after reading my favorites over and over again, I started on one end of the section and read everything on the shelves all the way to the other end, including nonfiction books. But my earliest, the Frog and Toad series, love that. And in high school, I started getting more into trying to figure out more about who I am as a Black woman and stuff like that. So I read Angela Davis, Women, Race, and Class, Zora Neale Hurston, of course, just devouring those, but just a fan of really, really good, solid storytelling.
And then last question I've got, would you ever write in any other genres?
Yeah, and so as far as genres of different types of writing, like nonfiction, I certainly have. I've done plays, web series, but in any other genres of fiction, I have a short story in speculative fiction I've been doing a lot of note taking because I really, really love speculative fiction and sci-fi. And I feel like that there is something brewing in me that's going to be there. But I'm still working on the science part of it.
More research.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you both so much for taking time to be with us here today. This was an absolutely beautiful conversation. Yeah, please support Shelly Connor, buy her book. I'll leave a link where you can do so. Everyman is out today. And also support Deesha Philyaw. I'll leave a link where you can buy The Secret Lives of Church Ladies too.
Can I just say one last thing?
Please.
The cover art for this was done by a brilliant Black queer artist, or based on her artwork, Shamia Richardson. So I love that. I love the cover. But one of the things I noticed about the cover is if you are a type that deals in shea butter and hair oils and food grease and stuff like that, it's gonna mark up. So if you really, really are one who cares about the cover, you might want to remove it while you're reading. If not, enjoy it. Get all those prints all on it.
This is what I'm going to do. I'm buying 2 copies. This is my reader copy, and then my, my shelf copy will be pristine. So that's what I recommend.
Yeah, excellent advice. Please buy 2 copies of Everyman.
Yes.
Thank you so much. I hope that you both have a wonderful rest of your day.
Oh, thank you guys so much.
Thanks, Salem. Bye.
Goodbye.